will be in for a really wonderful discussion. He is not at a loss for words, and all of them are very worth hearing. But just a quick word about the University Archives. This is the main location, the University Archives. We also have two other locations, one in the Sousa Archives and the Center for American Music across the street in the band building, with, you can imagine what the topical focus is with that material, cuts across American music of a variety of nature, but music as a window on American history as well. And then at the Horticultural Field Lab location, the former Hort Field Lab, which is out next to the President's House on Florida Avenue, we have an extensive amount of university administrative records, things relating to agriculture, faculty papers, but the real topical center of that is where Ellen and Charlie come into play. It's the Student Life and Culture Archives, which is the result of an endowment from an alumnus from class of 1930. And that's a program that's been going now just a little bit over 30 years, Ellen, right? Started effectively in 1990, and the first Student Life and Culture Archivist began in 1991. Ellen began in 1999 and has been with the program ever since. And if you think about that, that's a substantial amount of time to really have built the program out significantly. Alumni papers are a significant part of that. And in Charlie's, alumni papers oftentimes cover, like the Reston papers, a long career in print journalism that started after he left the university, although he was trained here in journalism. But in this instance, what I really like about this collection is it shows Charlie's Charlie's involvement as a student, his class papers. We have papers I checked just a few minutes ago. His instructor for photojournalism was Dick Hildwine, and we have a file on the Journalism 360 class, which he has represented. In this first case here, we have files from the teacher side in the papers of Hildwine that are out at the other location. So that's kind of a good picture of what Archives has and does. It looks for original sources that are kept with the integrity of evidence that comes with them being kept the way they were created and from their separate creators. And we bring them all together in a contextual arrangement so that one source can interrogate the other. And in Charlie's case, we've got really a dream collection to show to undergraduates today what happens to an individual when they go through the educational process and get started on a career, whether it's in accountancy or graphic design or music or engineering. And with that, I'll shut up and let the others speak. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Ellen Swain. I'm the archivist for Student Life and Culture. I think we'll start this off. I'm going to give you a bio of Charlie, and then a few of us are going to talk just for a couple minutes apiece about the project and how the materials came to the archives. And so we're all really excited to have Charlie here and really looking forward to his presentation. So just as bio information, Charlie graduated from the U of I with a BS in journalism and an MS in journalism. The BS was in 77 and the MS in 78. While he was here, he worked at WPGU, lived at Unit 1, and you'll hear more about all of this, was involved in Students for Environmental Concerns and a host of other activities. As career, he is founder and publisher of the award-winning Chicago Public Square website, founding head of news at startup Rivet Radio, and principal at his consulting practice, Meyerson Strategy. He's devoted a career in Chicago to connecting great journalism with growing audiences online, on air, and in print. He's the winner of the National 2016 Edward R. Murrow Award for Newscast, for online audio investigative reporting, and the 2018 Chicago Headline Club Award for Best Radio Newscast. Sorry, I can't read. The latest of dozens of awards for his work at Rivet, FM News Chicago and Chicago Tribune, WNUA, and WXRT-FM. He's held managerial roles at the Tribune, WGN-AM, and WNUA-FM. He's contributed to Chicago Public Media, WBEZ-FM. I can't read all of these radio stations.
That's enough.
And Great Chicago Business. And he's also served as adjunct professor of journalism at Roosevelt and Northwestern Universities and Columbia College at Chicago. So our connection actually started with a project that Laura Haber, the director of Unit 1, and I worked on starting in November of 2020, right before Unit 1's 50th anniversary in 2021. And Laura's idea was to contact alumni of Unit 1 to give materials to the archives to document the program and also do some oral histories with that. And so Charlie answered the call. And as we were talking, he sent us Unit 1 material, but he also had all this other stuff from classes. And as you'll see if you look at the exhibit, the materials that we have from his collection now include academic work with professors' comments on paper, scripts, syllabi, over 250 photos of campus life, Unit 1, bands, WPGU, from a photojournalism class, as well as recordings. And we have we're starting to digitize those, and we have the first batch done and online now. His papers are processed and available for research. I've got a couple more things to do with them, but they will be available next week for research. And so we're just really excited to have those. I will turn it over to Laura here for her piece.
Hi, everyone. I don't know if it's okay. I'm Laura Haber. I'm the director of Unit 1, which is a living learning community that is housed in Allen Hall, which is a residence hall here at the University of Illinois campus. So as Ellen mentioned, Unit 1 has existed for over 50 years. We started in 1971. 1971. And the idea of Unit 1 is that it's like a small liberal arts college on a large research-oriented campus. It's gone through many changes over the years, but and Charlie's going to talk about his experiences in the 70s when it was still new and young and very experimental. Now it's very established. But I want to just let you know that it still exists. It's still very vibrant. It is the entire hall. We have free music lessons, 4-credit classes, guests in residence, a music recording studio, a radio station, and a dark room and ceramics lab and all sorts of things that allow students to have a more engaging, vibrant, and exciting education here at the university. So they're not just collecting credits towards a degree, but actually having an education that they have more control over, that's exciting and that is more personal than they might have otherwise. So we're really happy to have Charlie's contributions to our archives. We're reaching out to other alumni, if you know alumni, who would also like to contribute to the archives, any kinds of things, memories and physical artifacts of their experiences with Unit 1. So thank you.
Is that my cue?
I'm sure it is.
2 more people.
Oh, that's fine. It's not my cue.
Go ahead. He's ready.
Just giving it a little more juice.
Hello, and thank you, Ellen, for including me in this really great project. I'm the communications librarian, and I work over at Gregory Hall in the communications library. And it's really a pleasure to be able to work with students who are so excited about the media and really want to make a big contribution on society. And one of the challenges that I face is in the challenge of helping them make the transition from academia to the industry. And they always want real world examples to help them see how what they learn in the classroom, how it really works and how it has significance. So of course, the materials that Charlie has donated, the interviews, the transcripts, and all of those things really fills such a large gap in our efforts to help these students connect the dots. And in addition to the students that I work with in advertising and journalism and media studies, there's also a large group of students in history who understand the significance of the media, especially with American culture. And they love researching the history of the media and its significance. So these materials that Charlie is giving us are really going to meet so many different types of students and academic researchers' needs. And I'm really looking forward to digitizing them so that they not only are of value to people on this campus, but to people all over the world and really understand the significance of the American media. So thank you again.
Hi, I'm Charlie Myers. No, just kidding. No, I'm not Charlie.
You look a lot better than I thought you would.
My name's Joshua Harris. I'm head of the University Library's Media Preservation Program. Part of the Preservation Services Department, we are in charge of making sure all of the library's collections, regardless of format, are preserved for the long term and able to be made accessible to the general public and researchers and everybody who wants to see them and use them. We primarily deal with media, and by that I mean old audio tapes, video, film, things that are held on a physical piece of something. And most of the archivists and collections managers and librarians often reach out to us when they are looking into acquiring collections. If they have media in them, we'll take a look at them and give them advice and guidance on what this is going to entail to preserve all these audio tapes or films. And Ellen and Lisa reached out to me, and Christina, who is my project manager in preservation and my help always. And with this idea that this collection was going to be possibly acquired by the Student Life and Culture Archives, and we as preservationists look at things as if a tape is a tape is a tape. We treat everything the same. We try to just do our best to preserve everything in the best way possible. But it was pretty clear to us early on that there was a special collection and some really, really great stuff. And we are the lucky ones who get the pleasure of being able to listen to almost all of it as we digitize it, preserve it, which is not just a easy press play and we'll let it roll and just listen to it and then put it on the internet. It's complicated, but it's a pleasure to be able to work with Charlie's material. We're so glad to have it here at the library, and we look forward to taking it from this tape and being able to turn it into a digital object that is able to be shared way wide, across a way wider spectrum than probably Charlie could have imagined when he made it. So we got the pleasure of having Charlie up to the labs today and showing him around, and we're just so excited to be able to be part of this. So thank you, and now I will turn it over to the real Charlie.
It was tremendously moving today to see what's been done with all this stuff. I'm incredibly, as I've said many times today, I am incredibly grateful that my stuff is getting this much attention. And with luck, this projector will work. Everybody can see that. Thank you for turning out. Great to be here. I wouldn't be here talking to you today if I didn't save everything. And I wouldn't be here talking to you today if the University of Illinois, in its wisdom, hadn't decided that my, let's say, stuff from my era at Illinois was worth keeping. Which has been great and welcome news for my relatives, my wife and my sons, who have been begging me for years to find a home or a trash bin for some of that stuff. And before we go further back in history, half a century, which means I'm about to give short shrift to almost everything that I'm going to tell you. I want to take you back to June 7th, 2017, when Laura Haber at Unit 1 posted a fateful message to the Ghosts of Allen Hall Past group on Facebook. The Alumni Association is working on a history display for the Alice Campbell Welcome Center. They'd like to have some photos or 3D artifacts from Unit 1, which, as you know, is a pioneering project in the Allen Hall dorm where students devised their own courses and taught one another from their own skill sets. I wasn't ready at that point in 2017 to part with actual 3D artifacts, but I had been digging through some old audio from my student days at the U of I, including my freshman year, when I created my first radio documentary for student station WPGU about, in what I might now consider a significant conflict of interest, my dorm, Allen Hall, and Unit 1.
When the student unrest that shook the campus in the late 1960s finally reached the administrative hierarchy of the University of Illinois, the Chancellor's office formed CRUEL. That's the Commission to Reform Undergraduate Education and Living, which is currently on ice and inactive. Created in 1970 to humanize the often criticized computer-run campus, CRUEL's first and some say only major achievement was the creation of Unit 1, billed since its beginning in 1971 as a living learning experiment. The unit's goal was to bring the dorm room and the classroom.
I shared that with the group and with Laura, and that was fun. But then in September of last year, Laura ratcheted things up with a call for, and I quote, stories, memories, artifacts, photos, posters, recordings, letters, diaries, electronic media, and anything else that might help document the history of Unit 1. And then we were off to the races, because I saved it all. This, for instance, from my fictional concoction for a science fiction as social forecasting class at Unit 1. And if you can read my scrawls in this mock-up of a newspaper clipping, you might see some things that evoke more recent global history. The call for Unit 1 memorabilia connected me to U of I archivist for student life and culture, Ellen Swain, who, to my surprise, and again my family's delight, has at least pretended to be interested in virtually everything I never threw away from my college years, and even other stuff that I've hoarded through almost half a century in journalism. A career that began in earnest right here at the U of I, former College of Communications and WPGU. My journalistic destiny was probably set in stone long before I came here. Both my parents were newspaper people, and so I developed an early interest in the news, and no surprise that I worked on the student newspaper in high school and freelanced for the Orland Park newspaper in high school and through summers in college. It's a column I wrote about riding my bike from Champaign back to Orland Park. It was frightening. Route 45 all the way. And I also, as many of my generation did, had a passion for science and space. And once it became clear to me that I really didn't have the right stuff to be an astronaut, I figured the closest I could come to the space program would be as a journalist. And more on that later. So that combo, science, journalism, technology, was a common thread as I applied to college. And I applied a bunch. I was accepted at Northwestern, the universities of Michigan and Chicago, and Princeton, whose spelling left something to be desired. But, Einstein wound up there, I thought, so, worth considering. And they sent me what may have been the only telegram that I think I ever received in my life. And Illinois took me in. When I consulted my dad about where to go, my mom had died 3 years earlier, his answer was, I think we can afford Illinois, Charlie. So Illinois it was. I know it still kind of stings, but stay tuned. It worked out. In the years that followed, my two wonderful sisters made the same choice. Back in 1973, when I took the U of I up on its acceptance offer, you couldn't major in journalism until you had enough credits to qualify as a junior. So I had to pick another major, and I somehow managed to persuade the chemistry department to take me in with a scholarship. And I really regret depriving someone who was genuinely interested in chemistry of that cash that I took, especially since it became clear quickly that I really wasn't cut out for chemistry. I got the first D of my college career in chemistry, despite my elaborate note-taking. Amazingly, in retrospect, I got a B for both courses, both semesters. But they are pretty, aren't they? Meanwhile, outside the classroom, things moved more quickly. On quad day of my freshman year, I checked in with both WPGU and the Daily Illini. WPGU called me first and had me on board within a few days, doing newscasts via the dorm broadcasting system, which was a way at the time of smuggling beginners' radio shows to the dormitories via the building's electrical currents. Your radio could pick up a signal, but your radio had to be within, 10 or 12 feet of electrical wiring in the building. You couldn't get on the over-the-air FM station until you proved you were good enough for the big time. And by the time the Daily Illini got back to me and offered me a chance to work with the paper, I was waist deep in magnetic tape and newscast copy. And although I was game to do both, you couldn't do that because at the time, in that era of Watergate, so many people aspired to be journalists that one person was not allowed to work in both places, because that would deprive someone else of an opportunity, and everybody wanted those opportunities. So even though I aspired to be a print journalist, WPGU gave me the chance to explore both being a radio reporter, anchoring the news, and being a DJ.
About a minute after 7 o'clock in the morning, right here at the best rock around, WPGU Urbana.
The Urbana-Champaign Senate's 50 student seats are up for election Wednesday and Thursday. About 150 candidates are vying for those spots.
And I loved both those roles. So sadly, I turned the DI down. Fortunately for the chemistry department, my advanced placement and college level examination program, or CLEP test, gave me enough credits after just 1 year to escape chemistry and the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences to join the print journalism program at the then College of Communications, which accepted me despite my snotty acceptance letter. My journalism education got off to a rocky start too, another D. Ah well. That second year brought lots of new fun, including a photography course in which I demonstrated proficiency just slightly more impressive than my efforts in chemistry, another B, but that yielded a bunch of photos that my Allen Hall, that's my Allen Hall desk, by the way, a bunch of photos that now reside in the university archives. Some of which are over there, I was surprised to see. Meanwhile, at WPGU, I began to carve out a role as a kind of consumer advocate in the mini documentary series known as Probe. Many installments of which are among the audio tapes that I'm now entrusting to the U of I Media Preservation and Digital Reformatting Project, which is doing amazingly detailed restoration work.
I'm Charles Meyerson. This is Probe, the show that answers your questions, solves your problems, and checks into things you want to know more about. This week, for instance, we got a call from a listener named Mark, who lives in Champaign.
Yeah, I've been collecting my Daily Illini for the last semester and a half, and I got all these newspapers hanging around, and I've been waiting and looking in the paper for, a recycling place or, paper drive, and I don't see it.
An appropriate question, we think, for what has been called...
Although in retrospect, a lot of the consumers for whom I was supposed to be advocating suspiciously shared my passion for science and science fiction. But that led to some memorable interviews with people like Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry, who explained what was holding up the first Star Trek movie.
At the behest of the local Star Trek Federation, Probe called Roddenberry's Hollywood office last Tuesday to find out what the delay is. And he said...
Our attitude is we don't want to rush into a hurried script that is not really what we want. We we feel, and we think the fans probably agree with us, it's better to come out a month later and wait and get exactly the script you're looking for.
The joke for years, maybe even still, has been that students paid U of I tuition so they could work at WPGU or the Daily Illini, and the academic opportunities were just fringe benefits. To believe that would be to ignore the surprising ways, in my case at least, in which those requirements for journalism majors, that they take a lot of classes in a lot of different subjects, paid off over the course of my career. In 1979, working at my first pro job at WMRO and WAUR in Aurora, I brought to bear some of what I learned in a course I derided as Nuclear Engineering for Dummies. And as I was looking for a job in Chicago in the months after that year's 3 Mile Island nuclear plant partial meltdown in Pennsylvania, that reporting and my U of I education helped me sound a little smarter than maybe some other radio reporters.
A couple of good things about fusion. Number one, it doesn't leave much in the way of radioactive waste, disposal of which is a big headache. Number two, it uses hydrogen, which is available in a practically limitless quantity in seawater. Fusion involves...
And that reporting was part of what helped me land a job that, as I've said many times in many places, sprinkled fairy dust over all the rest of my career. Reporter and news anchor at WXRT FM in Chicago, which was at that point a young rock station that mixed news and music in surprising and rewarding ways. XRT gave me a chance to scratch that itch for science and space reporting. Among other things, it gave me a platform in 1985 from which to submit one of 1,700 applications for NASA's Journalist in Space program. But before NASA could name a winning applicant, disaster happened in January 1986, giving me the sad responsibility of telling listeners that the Space Shuttle Challenger had exploded.
The problem seems to have developed with either the main liquid fuel cylinder, the big one in the middle, or one of the two solid rocket boosters to either side of the shuttle. Whatever happened with no notice, happened so quickly that a ground controller continued to treat things routinely, droning off numbers and statistics even after the videotape clearly showed the explosion. So NASA's instruments may not reflect whatever the problem was. With no notice, they never had a chance.
NASA named 40 finalists for the Journalist in Space program that May, just a few months later. I was not on the list. Was kind of a relief at the time. We were expecting our firstborn son. But NASA never named a winner. Next year brought one of my most memorable interviews, a sit-down with legendary astronaut Jim Lovell, who gave us all that Apollo 13 quote. And this, by the way, is what he really said. Houston, we've had a problem.
During all the flights, things usually go wrong. Certainly in 3 out of 4 of my flights, we had failures along the way. We tend to become complacent with spaceflight because we had so many successes. I think the Challenger accident has maybe given us a better perspective of the risk involved in spaceflight than we had before.
There at WXRT, at the dawn of the consumer computer age, my computer science course at the U of I, and it was using cards just like that, helped me be a little more comfy than some other radio types when it was time to move from typewriters to computers. That comfort came even more in handy as I moved to my next job as news director at WNUA, which was an innovative smooth jazz station, just as radio transitioned to digital audio editing, which made radio news and audio editing more fun than ever, and gave me a chance to talk about the digital frontier with people including science fiction visionary William Gibson, who coined the phrase cyberspace, but who in 1993 didn't have and didn't want an email address.
Well, there are a number of reasons. One, I've developed a sort of cyber agoraphobia at the very thought of it. Another reason is that my working day consists of sitting in front of a Macintosh computer from 9 to 5, writing, and when I'm done writing, the last thing I want to do is sit in front of the same Macintosh computer while I open and read my email.
Also had a chance to talk to Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist Dave Barry, who in 1996 made affectionate fun of technology.
Why does anyone need personal computers? To me, the beauty of it is that you can now, in the privacy of your home, sit there and have a machine that is, able to do billions and billions of complex calculations in a second, and you can sit there and use that thing to play a game like solitaire. To me, that's a wonderful thing.
The Barry interview might have been a mistake, especially the part where I introduced him to the boss.
Nice to meet you. How are you? I've heard a lot about you from Charlie.
Same here, Ralph. You should fire Charlie. He doesn't really prepare his.
Could you wait another 15 minutes till the show's over? That joke, and it was a joke at the time, proved prophetic because the Telecommunications Act of 1996 cleared the way for fewer and larger corporations to acquire more and more radio stations and spelled the end of an era for radio news. In 1998, my employer, a precursor to the radio behemoth Clear Channel, later now iHeartMedia, eliminated WNUA's news department, which by then was just me. Or as the Chicago Tribune put it in writing about my layoff a few weeks later, the sound of news is fading out on many FM stations. But in 1998, the internet was beckoning. The Tribune, it turns out, was ramping up staffing to provide breaking news on its emerging website, a tip I got from the Trib's Steve Rinkevich, who happened to be married to Brenda Russell, who happened to be a contemporary of mine at the University of Illinois. She was president of the local chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists here. The Trib, whose staff at that point was conditioned mainly to think of meeting just 1 or 2, maybe 3 deadlines a day, suddenly needed people used to thinking in terms of hourly or half-hourly or minutely deadlines, and a radio news guy seemed like a good fit, or so I thought, and fortunately for me, so at least a few people at the Tribune agreed. And thanks to my U of I degree in journalism, I, unlike a lot of broadcasters, knew how to spell, punctuate, and I owned an AP style book. And thanks to that computer science course, I was comfy around computers. So in November 1998, I turned down another job in radio news that had been offered to me to join the Tribune to work on this weird new thing. My friends in radio were puzzled why I would do this. Internet news, including overseeing the launch of the Trib's pioneering email newsletter program. I spent 11 years there, most of them first guy in the morning, to decide what would go on the front page of the website, and then composing a daily email news briefing, Day Watch, that went out at 10 o'clock each morning, along with news alerts when big news broke, which sadly it did not long after we launched this program. In those early text-centric days of the Trib on the web, I filed what may have been the first audio interview for the Tribune's website, a talk with science fiction and fantasy author and Illinois native, Waukegan, Ray Bradbury, who, to my surprise, didn't think much about cyberspace.
I don't have a computer. I don't believe in the internet. It's a step backward. It's a game show, and it's idiotic.
I'm going to compress what followed to get to the main lessons of my journey from dorm broadcasting to the digital frontier. In my time at the Trib, I moved from the 4th floor of Tribune Tower, the internet team's space, down to the 1st floor, the home of the Tribune's sibling WGN Radio, and then back up to the 4th floor of Tribune Tower as we moved the radio news operation into the middle of the Tribune newspaper newsroom, in what once, in fact, had been the newspaper editor's office. It was a pioneering move, coincidentally paralleled around that time by the merging of WPGU and the Daily Illini here on campus, but something that sadly didn't last much longer than my relatively brief 2 years at WGN. That's another story. That's a whole other lecture. Happy to give it sometime. Good study in media and management, but for another time. After that, a series of adventures at the intersection of journalism and technology, a year at an innovative but short-lived and award-winning experiment in all news on the FM dial, FM News Chicago, and 9 years and counting, I'm still there as the nagger-in-chief, at one point the founding head of news, still the founding head of news, at Rivet, a startup that set out to reinvent radio news for the smartphone era and won a bunch of awards along the way, and that now is primarily a producer of podcasts, and with which, along the way, I was awarded, who saw this coming, a U.S. patent. And my other current baby now, Chicago Public Square, which is, stop me if you've heard this, an email news briefing that arrives in people's mailboxes at that old familiar time, 10 o'clock, and that is supported with completely voluntary cash from readers who don't want me to quit. Supporter number one, by the way, a U of I contemporary and Daily Illini alumnus, Mark Wukas. Wonderful guy. One of the joys of email in this present media landscape is this. Chicago Public Square has been a platform for virtually anything and everything that I have learned to do over the last half century, including podcasting, interviews, on stage and off.
Peter Sagal is the host of NPR's incredibly successful show, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. But
I hate the title of my radio show. I have always hated the title of my radio show.
You know what else he hates? The place where he works.
Navy Pier.
It's beautiful. It's lovely. It's on the lake. Wonderful
Navy
views.
Pier.
I'm Charlie Meyerson. Those are just two of the revelations that emerged when Peter Sagal and I met on stage as part of the Wednesday Journal newspaper.
And even an award-winning newscast series has briefly found a home at Chicago Public Square.
The objections of one of the more raucous crowds in recent Chicago City Council history. The City Council's approved a plan for a $95 million police and fire academy in West Garfield Park. This is the Chicago Public Square newscast, and I'm Charlie Meyerson. The vote followed.
All of this work has paid off in a number of ways since 2017 with more honors and recognition, and it's become one of the most rewarding chapters in my now very long career. So how has my time at Illinois shaped my journey to the digital frontier? Well, a few ways, some of which I noted when I was honored to be inducted into the Illini Media Alumni Hall of Fame in the ancient past, 2008. If there's a recurring thread in my career, I think this certainly has been one of them. A continual quest to build a professional environment that matches what we had on campus here at the Illini Media organizations. A place where anyone could critique anyone else because we all shared the mission of getting better and doing better work, and where we were encouraged always to try new things all the time. I've been surprised to learn how rare that is in the real world. Also at WPGU, we learned not to fear technology, to kick it or pound it sometimes, but not to fear it. And always, for those occasions when it fails completely, have a Pink Floyd track ready to go. This one applies particularly to radio. We learned the joys of a job with almost no dress code, and needless to say, this is a promise delivered upon in spades by the pandemic. I was ready. Let me return, though, to the reason that I attended the U of I in the first place. Remember, I wound up here because, in my dad's words, we could afford it. In retrospect, the cost of not attending the U of I would have been, for me, unimaginably high, and here's why. That first professional job in Aurora, I got it because my WPGU news director and classmate, the late Alan Ludell, who just this year sadly and posthumously joined me in the Alumni Hall of Fame, a man that Joe Biden has been quoted as calling the smartest person I know. Alan was looking for work at the same time I was, and he passed on that job in Aurora. But he could have put a good word in for me, and I got it. I was hired. Had I attended one of those other joints, Princeton, Northwestern, Michigan, Chicago, I would not have met Alan. Alan wouldn't have recommended me for that job, and I wouldn't have been in a great position to apply for jobs in Chicago, especially that first dream job, that big dream job at WXRT. And even more important, I would not have been driving home from Aurora to Orland Park the afternoon of July 27th, 1978, when I was, let's say, engaged in a traffic accident. No tickets issued, no one hurt. Why does everyone want to know whose fault it was? Why is that always the first question? It's not important. I assure you, it makes no difference whatsoever. Had I not been in that accident, I would not have met the other driver, Pam McLean, who 5 years later would become my wife, and eventually mother to our 3 wonderful sons, and grandmother to our 2 wonderful grandsons, and who often notes that my insurance company paid in that accident. So you can see, I hope, that I owe my entire wonderful adult life, a life I would not trade for anything, to this institution. And that is why I am loyal to you, Illinois, and why I'm giving a lot more of my, let's say, stuff, including much of what you've seen and heard today, to the library. Thank you so much. I only cried a little bit. Questions, right? Questions or insults or suggestion for the next time I give this speech?
Are you an overall pack rat, or was it?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we haven't even begun to talk about the comic books and my dad's record collection and all the toys from my kids and from my childhood that I saved that are now coming in quite handy with 2 grandsons. Although the tension is, do I let them play with it, or do I sell them on eBay, or donate them to the University of Illinois Archives? Do you need any Lego? Yeah, there's, I mean, what I've given to the archives at this point is just the tip of the iceberg. So there's more to come if they don't wave me off. Yes?
I went to a presentation by iHeartMedia last week, and they were talking about the future of sonic branding, and of course it was about advertising, but the stats they gave on the number of people who are listening to podcasts and how sound is changing the world were really impressive. So I'm interested in, what do you see for the future of news podcasts? I mean, are we really going all audio, or?
I think what we've seen in the future in the last 20 or 30 years suggests that none of us should get too far ahead of our skis in making predictions. By the way, I'm a terrible skier, so that metaphor is nothing to listen to. There's some interesting challenges for radio. And I see Jordan here from Illini Media. So Jordan's heard some of this from me before. I think there's still tremendous value in over-the-air broadcasting, radio and television. But the notion of be there at this time to watch, I don't even know when most of my favorite shows are on television. I just know when I sit down in front of the TV, the DVR has them ready for me. Radio has a shortcoming in that radio, there's no DVR or AVR, audio, DAR, digital audio recorder for radio. I don't listen to live radio very much. I did for 3 hours driving down here today. And at least a few times I wanted to skip back, play that. I was listening to, over the air radio. I can't do that. Where's my radio DVR? Where's my radio DVR that lets me record a show for later listening? A lot of it does show up as podcasting, but so much of radio is still live. Actually, not enough of radio is still live, because back in the 70s, radio's mantra was more rock, less talk. Radio can't win that game now, because if you want more rock and less talk, Pandora, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, all can do it far better than announcers who have to stop every 15 minutes to play commercials. But I think there's a place for live radio, and that is live local events, things that can't be duplicated by these big national behemoths. There should be more live broadcasts, both of news events and of concerts and musical events and entertainment events from local venues, because that's what Spotify is not set up to do, for instance. A friend of mine, that's okay. A friend of mine in radio, when we launched Rivet, which was, as I mentioned, and I love the idea, a notion of reinventing radio news for the smartphone era, sort of Pandora or Spotify, or a friend of mine referred to it as Tinder for radio news, in that you press play. If you heard a story you liked, great. If you really like it, you can swipe right and hear it again. If you didn't like it, you swipe left and you're on to the next story. A friend of mine in commercial radio in Chicago said, "Oh, I don't think that's going to work. We have our listeners trained to tune in at certain times." And the whole notion of media training the audience to do something is something that's going away. If I want a traffic report, I don't want to have to wait until 7 minutes after the hour. I want it right now. And, increasingly, I can get it from my phone just by looking at it. But if I want to listen to it, that's what Rivet set out to do. Give me a traffic report now. So radio faces a lot of challenges. It's not news that radio stations are cutting budgets right and left. Radio companies are cutting, as newspapers have been doing. The pain, I've been saying for years, is slowly, not so slowly now, moving up the bandwidth. The first pain that the internet wrought was against newspapers, text-based publications, because text is, was one of the first things to become popular and accessible on the internet. Audio followed. Radio is seeing some trouble, and now you don't have to look far on the news to see that TV broadcasting, as video as bandwidth has increased and video is more accessible everywhere, TV is beginning to feel these same pains. Kind of answers your question? Okay. Yes.
So, talk about having institutional support. There's a movement towards everyone being empowered with their own platform. There's like the other side of that is the long-form journalism and the kind of clickbait tendencies where you're trying to kind of get the red meat out there to get as much attention as you can. And I was just wondering if you had anything to say about the integrity that's involved in that and sort of where you see that going.
Jordan, you could join me. We were at the Tribune, for some of this time. There is in certain sectors of the media business, people who've been here a long time, an urge to dismiss, or was an urge to dismiss what happens on the internet. That's just clickbait. You guys aren't doing serious journalism. My habits, again, I came up through radio news, where ingrained in us at the time, because radio was ahead of the curve in terms of where the media wound up in internet. Radio has always been a world where the competition is a click away. In your car, you can change the radio station as soon as it gets boring. We were taught in radio at WPGU and on after that, especially if you're doing news on a music station. I'm going to swear here because this is the way don't you newscasters be a fucking tune-out. Your news had better be interesting, because otherwise our audience is out and they're not going to be around to listen to Led Zeppelin when your newscast is over. So, one of the precepts of writing radio news was hammered into me is make the first words of your newscast, the first words of every story, the most interesting words in your story. In the internet world, everybody needs to live in that business. I mean, once upon a time, a newspaper was thrown on your doorstep or in your bushes, and if you wanted news, that's pretty much all you had. I mean, before the internet, before phones and all the rest of that. So newspapers had a captive audience. They didn't have to be that engaging. Take it or leave it. Here's our news. Now, of course, there still is a lot of great journalism in print and online. But the internet has made everyone aware of the fact that we're in a constant fight for the audience's attention. So people talk about clickbait headlines. And one of my jobs at the Tribune was early on, hey, Charlie, you're looking at the metrics. Will you go talk to the newspaper staff about how to write more compelling headlines for the web? One of the points I made was that what makes a compelling headline on the web also makes a compelling headline in print. The same thing that makes people click online is the same thing that makes them stop turning pages. And so I say I dismiss clickbait. There are two classes of headlines. There are good headlines and there are bad headlines. A good headline is a headline that connects the story with the maximum number of people to whom that story has value. It says, hey, this is important to you, read it, you'll find something rewarding in it. A bad headline is a headline that doesn't make the story interesting when it could make the story interesting, or that connects people with the story that they will not find rewarding. Sort of, hey, you won't believe this, click this, and you get there and you believe it. That's a bad headline. It's clickbait, it's successful once or twice, but in the long run, people get tired of it. So the art of writing a good headline, one that connects content, whether it's a tweet that gets people to listen to a podcast or a headline that gets people to read an article, is one that is as interesting as possible without overselling the subject matter. And it really boils down to something that people who work with me are tired of hearing me say, which is most interesting word first. If it's your podcast, if it's a headline, ask yourself, what is the most interesting word in this story? How do I get it as close as possible to the beginning of the headline, to the start of the newscast, to the start of the podcast? So many podcasts where, again, the competition's a click away. Begin, hey, how you doing? Hey, it's great. We had a great weekend. How was your weekend? My weekend was great. No, I want to know what's in this podcast for me. Same thing. Now, live radio is a little bit different because you have presumably you have a kind of captive audience. They're in the car for a while, so you can take a little time to get to know them. But even there, the competition is a click away. So that's a really long answer. I'm sorry, you got me worked up here. I don't want to overstay my welcome. Anybody else? Going once? Going twice? Thank you all very much.